May I please have your full and undivided attention? It is time for the Paranormal Rundown. Hello, this is Cedric Dankworth Smythe. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all fans of the paranormal, the supernatural, the unusual, the entertaining, the terrifying, the horrifying, and those things that go bump in the night and in the daytime too. This is the one and only Paranormal Rundown, where the lads, the gang of nerds, choose from over 2,700 carefully curated paranormal topics. This is episode 2 of the best of the Paranormal Rundown. Tonight covering season 1, episodes 6 through 10. It's going to be an amazing time as we talk about Walmart Heaven, where we all want to go someday, Reincarnation, and the Jewish Gilgul. We'll talk about Laredo's creepy little girl with the great southern saint of coffee, Chris James. We'll talk about table tipping and much, much more with a certified paranormal genius, Sylvia Shultz. It's going to be a ripping good time with some great talk. And as the Floyd says, all we have to do is keep talking.
Hello, everyone. This is Vic Hermanson with the Paranormal Rundown Countdown Part 2. We are counting down to the year 2025, which is now just a few weeks away. I'm here with my compadre, Dave Griffith, and we are now going to talk about Season 1, Episodes 6 through 10. What are we going to be hearing, Dave?
Well, we got some great stuff on these episodes. We had some really good conversation between just the Rundown crew. But we also had some great guests in this part of Season 1. We've got Chris James, Sylvia Shultz.
We had some very, very good guests.
We have. I think that in this one, those are the two main ones is Chris and Sylvia. But we have one of what I think is our best episodes coming up towards the end of the group here. And that's on Theodicy. So we'll talk about that more when we get to it.
Well, that's where every episode seems to kind of want to end up anyway. So it was probably a good idea just to tackle it head on and say, okay, what can we say about this problem of evil in the world?
Yep.
So, Dave, what is the first topic we're going to cover tonight?
So what we're starting with is, this is from episode 6. We're going in order like we did with part 1. And the first one is on Gnosticism, and the funniest title that we've ever gotten, and actually probably the most listened to episode because of it, which is Walmart Heaven.
Yes, I remember the title, Walmart Heaven. Just kind of popped out.
It did, and boy, I mean, I knew it was the title as soon as you said it. And this idea of Gnosticism has been in a lot of different episodes, current season and last. The different views on Christianity throughout time, and it's where sort of there's more of that paranormal flair to Christianity. You've got these sort of believing in magic and sorcery and all of that as part of it, not the whole picture. But this one is about the levels of heaven, and I thought that was quite interesting.
Okay, well, let's take a trip to Walmart Heaven and maybe above.
Is there a step above Walmart Heaven?
Well, one can hope. It's at least a possibility. I mean,
I don't know. how about Gnosticism? That sounds like an interesting
I am always up for Gnosticism.
Yeah.
All right, JJ, then you head us off in the Gnosticism path.
Sure. So Gnosticism is, and I want to stress this word extremely strongly, is a heretical Christian belief that started around 1st century CE, 2nd century CE. It is probably the vast majority of its literature has been found and handed down through the collection of works found at Nag Hammadi. And it is essentially a very unique blending of Egyptian, Semitic, and Hellenic magical concepts that has been interwoven into Christianity. And the basic idea of Gnosticism is that special knowledge is needed in order to gain access to the proper realms of heaven. So anybody can get into base heaven, but base heaven, just like a jackpot, is not really where you want to be. If you have the super secret knowledge and handshakes and rituals and whatever else may be involved, then you can start to ascend and you know exactly what to do to keep progressing into higher and higher levels of heavenly existence.
So with Gnosticism is not only the idea of magic involved in the religion, but it also defines these additional levels of heaven that aren't defined anywhere else. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes. And to add on to that, one of the biggest things that makes Gnosticism such a heresy versus the Christian quote unquote belief is most of them don't believe in the incarnation of Christ. They don't believe that it was God became flesh and born. They just think he was some kind of supreme being that just existed, but has nothing to do with the triune Godhead or, like I said, the incarnation born of the Virgin Mary. And so that totally flies in the face of everything that the Christian world believes in.
Excellent point.
Well, I guess going back to my high school days and studying this sort of thing, the memories that I have are that Gnosticism views, or at least parts of it, view the physical world as fundamentally base and contaminated and evil, and the spiritual world as the only place where there can be any goodness. And I always wondered, if you're just a regular guy and you get into Walmart heaven.
What a great term. Walmart heaven. I love it. And there we have the name of the episode. Okay.
Walmart
Good.
heaven.
Right off the bat.
That is absolutely awesome, guys.
So if you get into Walmart heaven, how does your experience differ from the Saks Fifth Avenue heaven? And of course, nobody knows, but hey, that's what we're here for, to speculate.
Well, does Gnosticism describe these levels of heaven, or does it just give names for them?
No, it does. It goes into great descriptions. Unfortunately, this is where my knowledge kind of tapers off.
Well, so there you know that there is a level of heaven that is Walmart heaven, which, of course, this time of year is quite busy.
Oh,
because
man.
you have Black Friday.
It's just wall to wall.
And you got Christmas all the way through the end of the year. I mean, the aisles are full. There's people everywhere. The lines are long. I don't know. Walmart heaven has got to be crazy right now.
It's not how full the aisles are. It's how many of those big pallets they have out there of all the stuff that hasn't been put away yet.
That's right. Well, no, that's not stuff that needs to be put away. This time of year, they just sell it right off the pallets. Those are the Black Friday deals.
Yeah.
Well, so the next one you got to talk about. This was near and dear to your heart. It was a great story. So,
okay. Vic Hermanson, current Catholic, current struggling devout Catholic. When I meet people who tell me that, they're fully Catholic and everything is cool, man, I always look at them like, how do you do that? It's very, very hard to be a good Catholic, and I'm not a good one. Just be honest with you on that one. But before I was a Catholic, it was kind of a 3-step process, maybe 4. Please follow my rambling here. As a child, I was a Lutheran, kind of. About 14, I became a Catholic, kind of. About 17, I decided I'd be an atheist, kind of. And then sometime around...
I'm seeing a trend here.
Yeah. Sometime around 25, I decided that, boy, I read this great book by Julius Lester. The book is called Love Song. We'll put a link to it. It's a very, very good book. It's about his path to becoming the son of a Southern Baptist minister. Julius Lester is a black man, to becoming a Jew. And in that book, I learned all kinds of things. And one of the things I learned about was the concept of the Gilgul. First off, which is a really cool word, Gilgul.
It really is.
And I remembered certain things about my childhood, like growing up in this weird little town in Louisiana and knowing some Hebrew. And I don't remember having Hebrew lessons. They don't have a Hebrew school in Converse, Louisiana. But still, I knew certain basic Hebrew terms. So I began to think that maybe I was a Gilgul. And I talked about this concept to a number of rabbis, and not a single one of them ridiculed me or told me to go away or told me that was a silly idea. So, of course, sooner or later, this whole idea is going to be brought back up in the Paranormal Rundown, because that's what we do. This expanded to reincarnation. This expanded to everything to do about what is liable to happen to a soul that just might be given a second chance to have a temporal existence. There was a time when I seriously thought that I could be a Gilgul.
A who?
A Gilgul. It's a Jewish, I think it's a Kabbalistic concept of if a Jewish soul is denied the chance to live a Jewish life at some point, then some years down the line, it will reincarnate into another human with memories of things that happened during their life. And they'll be inexorably drawn to once again being Jewish. Well, I went through a period when I was, started probably when I was about 24, 25, where I read one single book. So you guys tell me if this is boring or not, but the book was Love Song by Julius Lester, talking about his conversion to Judaism. And as I was reading it, I began to remember things that I did as a child. So when I was 6 in Converse, Louisiana, I knew a number of Hebrew words. And there was no possible way that I was going to learn any Hebrew in Converse, Louisiana. I had a kind of an understanding of the whole idea that there is a group of people called the Jews. And once again, I wouldn't have learned that. I always felt this sort of, affinity, love for Jewish music, Jewish images, things like that.
Uh-huh.
And so I just began to wonder, is that what I am? Am I a Jewish soul searching for reintegration into greater Judaism? I eventually decided I was not. I have no idea how, as a child, I learned those things. But I don't know anybody else who's had that feeling. Where
that is fascinating.
It kind of reminds me of the subject of reincarnation.
Yes, it does. It is a type of reincarnation. But I would ask things when I was a child, and my mom she's dead, but she'll tell me about it. And, I had very little interest in the New Testament, but man, did I ever love the Old Testament. And I would ask these questions that were genuinely coming from a Judaic standpoint.
Yeah.
The Gilgul, is there an actual foundation in the Jewish writings for something like reincarnation?
Well, I believe it's a Kabbalistic concept, and JJ could probably tell me about that. But the Kabbalah has a lot of stuff in it that most Jews just kind of ignore.
Gotcha. So it'd be the Kabbalah. Okay.
Well,
that's what I was looking for.
The Gilgul is basically a concept of reincarnation or the transmission of souls.
Mm-hmm.
It means cycle or wheel. And so they believe that we're on this wheel of life, that you go from one life to another.
Well, I guess what I'm
in different human bodies, though.
Right. I guess what I'm getting at is there a connection? So Jesus was a Jew. He was Jewish. Yeah. So is there anything in the New Testament that references the Kabbalah?
No.
Not that I know of.
No. Okay. The only thing that would reference anything is our being resurrected with Christ. In other words, when we die, we're in this fleshly tent. We're more alive than we've ever been. So, I mean, the answer is no.
But there are, I mean, realistically, there are cases out there that are compelling for
very compelling. Yeah, very, very compelling. One of the places where they've researched that the most is the University of Virginia. And I don't remember the professor's name there, but we were doing work at the University of Virginia, and I just decided I would go see if I could find him. I did. Had a really, really nice afternoon. He was telling me about some of the kids mostly that he was working with. A kid who said, "Look, I was a fighter pilot in World War II, and he knew things that no kid should ever know about airplanes and World War II, and being a fighter pilot. I can't ignore that."
I think that's one of the most famous cases. The kid who was the fighter pilot actually knew details about when he died, how he
where
died, where he died, his name. I mean, this was like a lot of compelling information.
He knew the control systems of British airplanes.
Oh, wow.
Where does that come from?
Yeah. I mean, unless you can come up with the way that the parents are feeding this information, right? I mean, you could dispute it that way, but I don't know. There's a lot of interesting stories out there. But I had a discussion on a different Discord group about that, and somebody said, well, there's no evidence, there's no references in the Bible that say reincarnation is possible. Because my perspective was, well, I don't know if it excludes it. I don't think it says that that's what happens either. Well, I mean, no, absolutely. There's no references. So I was just curious if there was anything, but that person wouldn't have considered the Kabbalah to be a valid reference anyway.
Well, I mean, this is where my theology kind of deviates. Okay. yes, the Bible either says something or it doesn't say something about it, but God is utterly sovereign and can do what he wishes. And I'm not certain that there aren't times when God decides, this one needs a different path.
That's fair.
To me, that doesn't impact my faith at all.
Yeah, I'd say he has the right.
Absolutely the right. Yes. This one needs a different
we have
path.
the choice for that path too.
Yes.
I mean, God
we're given
path.
free will.
Yeah. But see, that goes with the great wisdom of Led Zeppelin. There's two paths you can walk by. Yes, I'm crazy, guys.
Father Mike, I love your musical taste and references.
Now, I think your musical taste is fantastic. And reading today is from the Book of Plant.
That's right, Robert Plant.
So,
all right. So what I'm looking for is my own personalized copy of the Book of Plant. I really, I think that's a very important daily readings. And so Vic, if you get me a copy of that, I'd really appreciate it.
I will get you a copy of the Book of Plant. Well, there are two versions.
That's right. Yes. Yes. One for each path. Well, our next one was just a lot of fun. This episode 7 was with Chris James, and Chris he's a writer. He's done paranormal investigating, retired, border patrol. He's got a lot of great stories, and he also really has that paranormal rundown frame of mind. He was able to just go in and out of different topics and stories right and left. So it was a lot of fun having him on the show. And of course, his favorite thing in life is coffee. So, I got to appreciate that. But we go into some stories with the Laredo Paranormal Investigation Team.
Laredo Paranormal Investigation Team. Elpit. No, dear sweet Dave has used the wrong initialism. The title is the Laredo Paranormal Investigation Society. We hope they will accept our sincere apologies.
Which is one of his books, which you can get on Amazon.
Yep. And where he's, some of the starting with that. And then we also get into the little girl in a white dress that keeps popping up all over Laredo. And that is the one that I find really fascinating.
Me too.
You were talking about, multiple people seeing it and in all kinds of different locations. So that's a great, to a paranormal investigation team, that's a great
it's a very
story to happen.
Different thing from most ghost stories.
It is.
Most ghost stories, the ghost, whatever a ghost might be, seems to be attached to a particular building or a particular road or a particular area. This one is just said, okay, this is my city.
Well, and usually, so you'll hear woman in white stories, right? It'll be on a roadside, or it'll be in an upstairs window of an old Victorian home, what have you, like that. But it's never the same woman in white, right? There's always little variations or whatever. But with this one, the stories are always the same, specifically down to the button-up shoes. And that's the really cool thing about it is that there's a consistency in it that you don't normally see in stories like that. So let's listen to what Chris has to say. Some great stories. Chris, have you ever done any investigating yourself?
Yes. When I first wrote the book, the Laredo Paranormal Research Society, I want in every ghost investigation they had so I could document what they were doing. And then one day Ishmael hands me a vest with the patch on it and says, "Oh, you're now a member." I was like, I didn't know I was joking. But
Right.
we investigated the Laredo Arena. Cold, wet, nasty, horrible night to be doing things. It was around 60, which for us, that's cold. And they have a woman who is seen walking along the second tier on the north side of the building. She walks along the causeway. She goes into the ladies' room. They hear the toilet flush after a couple of minutes. They hear the sink come on. There's nobody in there. The cleaning staff have been plagued by this apparition. Now, the building was new when we investigated. As far as any records, as far back as we could find, nobody died there. And yet they've got this ghost, a very clean ghost.
Yes, I was going to say.
Using the bathroom every night.
And the fascinating thing is that you're talking a second floor, very specific stuff that's built to that building that it's obviously not related to. A lot of times you hear about spirits that are, they'll call them residual haunts or whatever, where it's somebody walking through the motions, and you'll see where they're like walking above the floor or like halfway down the floor because the old building was at a different elevation.
Right. It's like the past spatial relationships still hold.
Right. But in this case, it's a new building with new fixtures, and they're washing their hands. That's interesting.
The toilet. We also, the entire city is being visited by a little girl in a white dress. I wrote a lot about her in 2 different books because so many people tell me about it. She's 7 to 8 years old. She's wearing a white dress, comes down to her knees, and she has boots with buttons on them. They stopped making boots with buttons in 1917. They see her and they say she looks solid. She looks real. She looks like a person until she disappears. Now, she's been seen at the college, which used to be the Fort McIntosh. Now it's the Laredo College. She's been seen at the health department on Cedar Street. She's been seen at the mall. She's been seen at a hotel across the street from the mall. She's been seen at the LEA also, the sports arena. And I asked people, tell me exactly how you saw her. They'll describe her to me, and it's the exact same description every time, right down to the boots with the buttons.
Wow.
How can a ghost get to that many places
throughout
years?
Can they relate this little girl ghost to some particular person, some particular event?
The place she is seen the most is in front of the Sears store at the mall, which is now closed.
Yeah, it's gone, yeah.
They would see her sitting in front of it. We still got the sign and everything up. It's just a big empty building. But they would see her sitting on the bench in front of that store the most. The cleaning staff. It got to a point where they would see her, they wouldn't look. It's like, okay, it's her. She's there. They would clean around the bench and they'd go on about their way without ever looking at her because they knew that the second they looked directly at her, she was going to disappear. Every security guard in the building has had a run-in with her. I spent 2 days sitting in the security guard's office interviewing guards about their sightings.
Hoping to have a run-in yourself?
Oh, no, I don't think I ever want to meet this girl. Cause is she a little girl, or is she something else?
Well, that's a good question. You never know.
If you see a little girl,
kind of opens the door. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, you see a little girl. It doesn't matter that she's been dead for, 100 years. You're not going to be afraid of her. Your instinct is going to be, I need to help this girl go to the light.
Mm-hmm.
What if she's not going to the light? What if she's going the other way? Disguise. What better disguise for a demon than to appear as a small child?
Well, gosh, I mean, JJ, that's
Well,
you know,
see,
the,
that kind of opens the door to what I was going to ask, and it may even open the door for JJ to jump in. When it comes to ghost or something like that Chris is talking about, when someone says a ghost, well, there's many theories out there about it. Could it be, first and foremost, number one, a demon? Is that ghost a demon? But then we have a whole nother idea that, well, maybe it's a spirit that has been let back from purgatory, searching for redemption. So, I mean, when it comes to when you see, I hate to use this term, but many people have used the term friendly ghost. Well, I personally don't believe in friendly ghost, you know, and number two is when you seek through a medium someone, you know, just kind of like Saul sought through a medium to visit Samuel. That wasn't Samuel. That was a familiar spirit. I want to hear you guys' ideas on that. What was that? Was it a demon, or was it a spirit from like people you like to throw in there now from purgatory that's been able to come back to seek forgiveness?
Well, in terms of the Saul story, that is firmly in the camp of this came at a time of Judaism where there was no devil. There was never a concept of a devil. Everything was controlled directly by God. Every spirit of destruction, every catastrophe, every bad thing that's ever happened was controlled directly by God. So that's what I would say on that front. But I would agree with Father Birdsong.
Right.
Where I grew up, there was never an idea of a friendly ghost. Now, we had a spirit where I grew up that infested our old house. And some people jokingly called it Patrick. And some people said, oh, yeah, it looks after us. No. This thing did nothing of the sort. It wanted nothing but mischief, and at worst, predictions of death.
I mean, you know, the great thing about this show and all these guys, this is just my opinion, that a lot of it is demonic mimicry, to mimic the things of a natural world to affect the people of the world, to drive them to fear or anxiety or depression or things of that nature. And you know, I would just like to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Well, I don't really like to go into the story. I did a podcast about it, but
there you go.
The only thing that I have seen that I would say felt ghostly was still living. I mean, I saw it was a kid who had come into the hospital with insane brain damage. His girlfriend had taken a 25 caliber Beretta or something and just, moved the gun around his head and just shot. Now, a 25 caliber weapon like that will enter the skull, but there's not enough power for it to get out of the skull, and it'll just bounce around in there. So he essentially had scrambled eggs in his brain, or in his skull. He wasn't dead. He still had enough lower function in the brain to breathe, and this kind of thing.
God.
It is. Oh my God. This was at, well, I'll tell you where it was. It was at the old Spring Branch Hospital in Houston. And he was in ICU bed 1, which was the bed closest to the nurse's station, right next to the medication room. We had all kinds of patients in that unit. Several times I saw the same young man standing next to the bed, making beckoning motions. Help me. It was by every definition a ghost, but it was the ghost of a person who was still alive.
Oh, we have stories like that in our family. I've had an uncle who was in a horrific car crash, and my grandmother was at home with a couple of other kids, and she turned around and she saw my uncle in the doorway. And she's like, "What are you doing here? I thought you were gone." And then he disappears right in front of her eyes. And she gets a phone call saying, "Your son has been in a horrible accident." And that's happened a few times in our family.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
From my point of view, with the things that we've investigated and I would guess as much as Chris has done with the team there, you run into stuff that's negative, stuff that's doesn't seem demonic, but just seems unpleasant, like grumpy, irritable, just doesn't want to deal with you. And then you have stuff that's just benign. There's no negativity to it. There's no evil tone, feel, timbre, anything like that. And I have a hard time believing that all of that is demonic. I don't see the end game. I don't see the purpose of it. Now, maybe that's just me not seeing the long-term plan, but, we've had discussions like this on JJ's Discord about whether, what does Scripture say about ghosts? And there's ghosts in there. It supports the idea of ghosts. It doesn't say what they are. It doesn't say where they're from.
Yeah.
Is it people in purgatory? Maybe. Is it people that haven't moved on yet? Maybe. I don't know. But it does seem to me that there's things with that we see investigating that there's no demonic aspect to it. Would you agree with that, Chris, from what you guys have seen?
It's one of those things that a lot of people will try to say, they'll try to put it in a box. It's going to go in this box, or this box, as opposed to just saying, we don't know where to put any of this stuff.
I don't have any idea.
It's like the Bigfoot question.
Hello.
What is Bigfoot?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
And if people would admit, we don't know, I think a lot of people would be a lot happier. There'd be a lot fewer arguments.
Not the truth.
It's these people that all of a sudden they know because they got a book that they want to sell, or they've got a TV show that they've got to produce. And so they're going to come up with these statements that it's going to lead to an argument. A lot of, I don't know, we're getting off the subject just a little bit here with Bigfoot.
Well, there's no getting off the subject in the Paranormal Rundown.
We are one long tangent.
No.
You've got hundreds of witnesses of Bigfoot activity that is paranormal. The creature has suddenly vanished from sight right there in front of their eyes. Or they're following the footprints in the snow, and all of a sudden they just disappear. Now, the experts get all upset when you tell them this, and they'll just stop listening to you. I am what's referred to as a woo. It means that my mind is open enough that I will believe that Bigfoot is something other than a big ape. I don't.
Well, there's one thing that I've learned over 31 years of ministry is that Mike Birdsong doesn't know a dadgum thing. So, so trust me, I'm open to anything.
Yeah, the sooner people admit that they don't know something, that's when you can learn something. But
Exactly.
when you think you know it all, it's like, man, the older I get, the less I know. It's just one of them things.
Absolutely.
So we don't know what a ghost is. We can define them by name. Poltergeist, that's a noisy ghost. Doppelganger, that's a ghost of a living person, like the patient you had. Don't know that it was a doppelganger, but that's what I would call it. But we've got names for them, but we don't really know what they are. They could all be the same thing, or they could be hundreds of different things. Until we can actually sit down and interview these suckers, boy, wouldn't that be a podcast? We may never know.
Yeah, I'd love to have that podcast.
Well,
absolutely.
Our next clip comes from Sylvia Shultz, who really is kind of the epitome of why the Paranormal Rundown exists. I can't tell you how many people who've known me in other parts of my life and, have been some members with me and this kind of thing tell me how idiotic I am for even participating in the Paranormal Rundown or anything like it. And I will say to them things like, hey, look, this is an area of inquiry. This is an area that offers us a knowledge of type, and I want to know those things. Well, Sylvia, along with Chris, is a very, very serious scholar of the paranormal world and a very serious scholar of other aspects of life. And she brings it together in just the most funny and entertaining and insightful way. So every time we have her on the show, it's just a blast.
Yes. Her laughter is infectious. She has such a light and happy personality.
Right.
And just knows stuff. I mean, from the books to experiences, a lot of great stuff there.
We've speculated that if she were in a truly dangerous paranormal setting, that probably just the innate joy of her personality would keep her safe.
Absolutely.
and you don't meet many people like that.
Well, and it's not in the clip here, but she is the one who nicknamed the group.
She really is.
And by saying, oh, that's just paranormal dork talk. I can do that.
I can do that all day long.
And so Father Mike has gone to calling us the Paranormal Dork Crew.
Well, she calls us the Paranormal Dork Crew or the gang. We use the gang of nerds. In fact, I think we're going to decide that this is a gang of nerds production.
Yes. Yes. Well, we have to keep Avalon happy.
From Gang of Nerds Media. Copyright 2024. So let's get on to Sylvia Shultz. I think you'll enjoy her time.
We did a very interesting experiment at the Roth House, seeing as how it had been a place where spiritualism was performed. I suggested that we try some table tipping.
Oh.
And it worked. It was awesome.
No kidding. All right. I've never heard anybody talk about table tipping before. Please, Sylvia, give us the whole story.
Okay. So the Victorians were very into table tipping.
Mm-hmm.
What they would do is they would get usually a round table, something very light, like a little end table sort of thing. And people would sit around it, and you just place your hands on the table, just your fingertips touching. and you ask the spirits to move the table. The first experience I had with this was at the Lizzie Borden house, and the table actually flipped over. It was amazing.
Yeah, I got to see that.
We didn't have that at the Roth house. I kind of led people through it. I explained, this is how you do it, and this is what we're going to say, and this is what we're hoping for. And people had just their fingertips on it, and we felt the table kind of vibrating. It never actually tipped, but we did feel it vibrating under our fingers, and that was just amazing.
Well, did any of the legs come up off the floor?
No.
But the one
unfortunately.
But the one that turned over, all four legs came off the floor.
Oh yeah. It went completely onto its side.
Did it hit anybody in the head or anything when it tipped over?
No. It just kind of moved up under our fingers, and we let go of it, and it fell to the floor.
So just like a slow motion, lifting and over.
Yeah, it was just.
So
that's amazing.
So when you have someone who's fundamentally skeptical and something like that, what are they saying is causing that?
Well, let's see. Not being a skeptic myself, I don't know how you would try.
I thought maybe you just had somebody who happened to come along who was, and I'll use that word, fundamentally skeptical. Because they really do not want to even entertain the possibility of anything other than just raw physical causality being at play.
I know a couple of diehard skeptics, my sister and my husband.
Okay.
And we were talking, Reverend Birdsong said something about inviting things in. My sister does not understand why I do what I do. She said it's just like playing ding dong ditch. And sorry, I didn't realize you were taking a drink just then. I would have said that.
I'm all right.
That's how my sister puts it.
Except in ding dong ditch, they don't ding back.
There you go.
Right. My husband just absolutely has nothing to say about any of this. But I wonder what they would say about something that happened like that a table just turns over when people only have their fingertips on it.
Well, that would be what I say. Y'all are ding dongs, and I'm ditching out.
Well, nice one.
I think one of the interesting things about all that is whenever you hear about Victorian spiritual practices nowadays, it's always done under the guise of it was all an attempt to make money. It was all a sham. They did some elaborate pranks, and that's true. They absolutely did. But I think that also ignores the fact that, there were people not in it for the money. They were not all charlatans that did all this.
Right. There were people that were really seeking answers, and
Exactly.
All right, so the next clip is also from the episode season 8 or season 1 episode 8 with Sylvia Shultz, and it is really an interesting one. This is one of those where we get pretty deep into a topic about priming and the idea of priming the environment, priming all kinds of different aspects of it. I think the initial thought you had, Vic, on this was priming for EVPs.
Yes.
But we take it in a couple of different routes as well. And then we get into the Philip experiment, which is always an interesting thing to talk about. So,
well, it kind of is getting into that realm of, if you expect something paranormal to happen, there's a much greater chance that something paranormal will happen.
Absolutely.
And that really brings up a lot of interesting questions, are we manipulating the paranormal reality of the universe, or are we causing these effects ourselves? And that's where this goes.
So what were you thinking when you wrote that one down, Victor? So what's the priming effect? Let's talk about.
Well, the priming.
I bet I know what you're talking about. Let me guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is this where you are talking about somebody plants an idea and therefore you pick up on it and then it starts happening? Or
well,
That's
you
what it
and
sounds
I,
like to me.
you and I have listened to, I don't know, 100 EVPs together.
yes,
Okay, I play an EVP for you and say, "Hey, Dave, what do you hear here?" And you'll listen. You'll say, "It says Henry," and in my mind, it says Pope Francis. I mean, you can really get pretty different.
and get way off.
You can get way off in these things. But if I say to you, "Hey, I'm going to play you an EVP that says, 'Please get out of my room," it's very hard for you to hear anything other than "Please get out of my room."
Exactly.
Got it.
Well, one thing is we got to understand is, folks like JJ and myself, we're good old Southern boys.
So am I.
So when you say the priming effect, we're thinking about pouring water down a pipe and priming a well.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Or pouring some gasoline in a carburetor and trying to get the
Sucking out of a hose.
50-year-old car to
A
start.
transfer. That's what you do.
Or just try. You ever have those old lawnmowers in which had the push button primers on it?
Oh, yeah.
At lines like that.
Yeah, I had that for years and years.
I just
and years.
remember my grandfather sucking it out of the hose to get it to transfer it from the car to the lawnmower.
That's it.
He needed some more gas.
But I do think that Vic is on the right page here. If he says, "I'm going to play you this little clip, and this is what I'm hearing," okay, so it's going to be very hard for anybody else to hear anything but that, just like you said. But to put it in real terms, well, David, I'll go back to quote unquote Paula, and this person believes or has such a priming effect in her life right now that she feels that she cannot be freed from the supernatural, so therefore she's not. So that when that priming effect or that thought or that idea, when it starts going through the human mind, and that's the only thing that you think of, you're basically helpless. It's hard to get around it. Yeah.
Well, now, Sylvia, I listened to the Road to Derry episode with Trailer Trash Tears. Really, really enjoyed
awesome.
that.
Thank you.
It sounded, you're welcome. It sounded to me like you do a lot of investigating at that facility.
I do, yes.
So when you hear EVPs from there, and y'all are passing it around, what do you think of this effect? Because I've investigated a bunch of different sites, and I can tell you that having a docent or one of the regulars there walk you around and say, "Oh, this is where we often get Mary on our EVPs," and all of a sudden you're getting Mary on your EVPs, and these things propagate over time and build like real legends out of something
absolutely.
that if you got to the original, you would go, "Yeah, that's not what that says."
Yeah.
Have you experienced stuff like that there?
Well, yes, I have. I'm friends with a renowned ghost hunter up in the Chicago area named Dale Kazmarek. And I was visiting him several months ago, and he was playing some EVPs for me that he had collected. And what I like to do when listening to EVPs is I like to listen to it over and over again and close my eyes so I have as little distraction as possible. There are some EVPs that I've listened to that are just clear as a bell. You can't possibly mistake it for anything else. But one of the EVPs that Dale played for me was they thought that they heard a woman saying a name like Edith or something like that. And I clearly heard Esther. It was something like that. It was different enough that I said, well, I really don't think that's what it says. I think it says thus and so. And then Dale listened to it again and he was like, oh, you know what? I think you're right. So I love it when you get EVPs that are just pristine and beautiful and you can tell exactly what they're saying. But most of the voices we get are open to interpretation, and we just do the best we can with the input that we have. And some people have different opinions as to what's being said.
Now, but when this topic first came up, I think there's two different aspects, and we've covered both of them. The first was I was thinking of priming more in terms of bias confirmation. But then it could also be, as Father Birdsong was saying, that if you have an environment prepped, then it's very likely that's going to be the result of it. And I think the ultimate case for both of these, have y'all heard of the Philip experiment?
I have. It's one of the topics.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
that one is it's fascinating.
Well,
Talk about it, JJ.
Yeah, talk about it.
All right. So Philip experiment, 1972. There's a paranormal research going on involving thought forms or tulpas. And these people they invented an entire spiritual person named Philip. They gave him a backstory. They thought about him. They would converse with him. And sure enough, really weird stuff began to happen during this entire experiment. And, a lot of people will say, oh, well, you've either primed the environment or you expected something to happen. And so it did. And that's just confirmation bias at its purest form. But I think that kind of skirts around some of the more interesting possibilities of it. It's a really fascinating experiment.
I find the idea of tulpas being possible just terrifying, because with all the stuff that's out on the internet today and all the things you could think into existence, a lot of them would not be fun.
Well, I think the Philip experiment really proved things. I mean, this is exactly what they were trying to do. They were trying to create a tulpa, and they put all their energy into it, and then they started getting results. So, yeah, I'm like, what did you think was going to happen? That's what you were. That's what you were working towards.
Yeah, this was your goal, and you accomplished your goal. What, Sylvia? Do you know how that experiment ended? Do you know what they finally did?
I am not exactly sure. All the literature kind of ends there. That they created this. They called this like Lord Philip or whatever into being, this medieval fellow into being. And then they just kind of, the literature kind of trails off after that.
All right. So the Philip experiment is definitely going to pop up again in future episodes. I think we've talked about that a couple of different times, and over time, different ideas come up. It's very interesting. But the next clip is what Sylvia called a nasty head ghost. And it's this idea, we as paranormal investigators, we have stuff follow us home sometime. It's a reality. It does happen. And I think that she had a friend, another writer who had a term for it, the nasty head ghost, because it wasn't demonic. It was just something more than something friendly or benign.
So it was something that she considered to be at least potentially hostile or dangerous?
Right. Yeah, hostile is something you don't want to have. Like, you don't want to have a nasty head cold. Right.
A nasty head ghost.
It's a little harder to get rid of. So, look, most of the times when we've had stuff follow us home, you just ignore it. right? And for 3-4 days, you'll have sounds, stuff will move here and there, and you just pretend like nothing's happening. You don't recognize it. We'll say to each other, Laura, my wife, yeah, something followed us, right? Do you see that? Do you hear that?
Right.
Here we go again. But our main response is just to ignore it, and then it gets bored, and it leaves.
Time to go.
It's time to go. It's like, well, I guess I'll go back. You guys were really fun when you were at my house, but your house kind of sucks.
You don't need fun anymore.
Right.
There's a Monty Python. You're no fun anymore.
So that would not be a nasty head ghost. That's just something that followed you, and it's benign. It's not doing anything harmful. A nasty head ghost is affecting you. It's not fun. But it's not demonic. It's not in that demonic realm.
So that kind of supports my idea of the demonic, or not the demonic, but the paranormal zoo, where there are different critters out there. It's not that they're all just absolutely evil or absolutely good. There are gradations, shades of gray, 50 shades of paranormal gray. All right, let's get to the clip.
All right.
Now, the first question is
the demonic
difference
versus when I was doing research for Hunting Demons, I talked to a lot of people about demons and their experience with demons. I have a friend named David Lowery who has had experience with battling demonic entities and other assorted nasties. And he was the one who said, who reassured me that there are a lot of times, notwithstanding what Mr. Zach Bagans says, that what you're dealing with is not necessarily demonic. It's just what he calls a nasty head ghost. Okay. I feel that, again, I've read an awful lot of the literature. And from my understanding, a demonic entity is something that has never been human.
Never been human.
And you guys would probably back me up on that 100%. A nasty head ghost is somebody who was deeply unpleasant while they were alive.
And they've just carried that personality with them.
Exactly, yeah. I've found in investigations and from talking to other investigators that somebody who was pleasant in life, like your great Aunt Joan, whatever, who still haunts your house, or the neighbor who passed away, who always baked your kids cookies, they're still going to be pleasant ghosts in the afterlife. Somebody who is a complete jerk is probably going to be a complete jerk in the afterlife too. And that's what David meant by really nasty head ghosts. They're just deeply unpleasant people to deal with even after they have passed on.
Have you ever run into one of those yourself?
I have, but he didn't give me a whole lot of trouble. He gave people trouble that I knew. It is a fellow who hangs out in one of the buildings at the Peoria State Hospital, the Pollock Hospital. He used to be a custodian there, and he still sees the basement as his territory. And
what is it with these guys? I've had that exact same experience.
Yeah. And he's just this crusty old dude who doesn't like people wandering around his basement. And he's all like, what are these people doing here? Just get out and leave me alone to do my job, is basically how his attitude is. And it's mostly custodians. Yeah. I was just watching something at Farrar School just earlier this evening, where one of the spirits there is the janitor who hangs out in the basement and tells people, get out.
Well, you're walking on his clean floor. Come on.
There you go.
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah, I'm messing up my stuff.
So let me say that. Oh, go ahead, JJ.
Oh, I'm just going to chime in and saying that I think that there is a definite difference between the supernatural and the preternatural. And the infernal are always preternatural because they are locked to either time or location. Whereas the supernatural, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not.
Sure.
Who knows?
Makes sense.
So in my experience, I've had something follow me home. It was like the maintenance guy or the custodian, and it was extremely negative, and it just drained me. It was like walking through water, for days until I realized, finally became aware enough to know what was going on and got rid of it. But it wasn't like possession, right? It was influence. It was draining. It was activity around the house. It followed me to work. It affected people around me. It drained people around me at work. I mean, it was really, really bad, but it wasn't what I would call, it certainly wasn't demonic. And I've had a demonic experience as well. Also, thankfully, not possession, but demonic attacks that lasted for several years. And that was hateful. That was horrible. It was malicious. It was, and the feeling between the two, one was just, I felt drained. My wife felt like something was hanging around that really didn't like her. The other, I felt like it did not want me to exist. Right. There was hatred there. And so I get I get the ghostly sort of negative head cold kind of thing. Right. But the question, I guess, would be, can something like this, an angry spirit or whatever, actually possess somebody? And that's sort of what you were getting at, right, Father Birdsong?
Yeah. Yes. And the reason why I say that is I actually believe it could. I mean, because if someone, just like Sylvia said, if someone was a jerk in the natural life, well, of course they're going to be an ass in the afterlife. And so whether you're demonic or not, if you're just a ugly person, you're going to want to do harm in some way, even if it's just mentally and emotionally attack you to be that jerk,
I guess my question around that would be, when you look at the demonic world and possession, you're talking about legal rights, right?
Yes.
In the end, there is some legal right given to the demonic to allow for that possession to take place.
Through your free will, you can accept the possession or the perfect possession or the integration or whatever you want to call it.
But through stuff you've done too.
Yeah, but you cannot help the attack. You cannot help the just like we're dealing with an unruly person. They're going to be mean to you, right?
Right.
You can't help that.
They have a right to attack you. They don't have a right to inhabit you.
Inhabit you, yes.
So what would be the mechanism that would allow a ghost, angry or not, to possess you? And the only thing that I've come across so far, and we've had a conversation, I don't remember when we had this conversation, Vic, but it was about out-of-body experience and astral projection, where you've left your body and potentially a ghost or spirit could enter it.
Well, that's because you allowed yourself to become vulnerable.
Right.
Oh,
but in this
vulnerable.
case, you're leaving yourself open. Your house is essentially empty. Someone takes possession of it, but it wouldn't have to be demonic necessarily to do that, because you vacated the president.
The president.
I can't speak.
Right.
Okay.
You vacated the house, right?
Let me put it to you this way. You, as a husband, you are the priest of your home, okay? if you neglect that, if you leave your home and no one's there, you just invited the door for everybody to come in because you're not there. You're not protecting it. And so if you fool around with a supernatural entity, whether ghost or demon or whatever, and you make yourself vulnerable, or you dismiss your presence at your home, so to speak, you just said, okay, come in and mess with me. But you can't, there's nothing that you can do. Just like Vic said, they got the power to mess with you, but they don't have the power to inhabit you unless you give it up.
But then to further complicate matters,
okay,
you also have many stories of other types of entities that can also possess, but they don't necessarily hate. Divots, for one, they can be viewed as more, I guess, if you put it into D&D terms, more chaotic neutral. They're just completely out for themselves.
You got Josh smiling now.
You've got Djinn, which some liken to be demons. Others say that they're not because they can be both good, neutral, or evil. Mm-hmm. And then finally, my experience in Japan of being psychically attacked. Mm-hmm. I can't put a classification on what that thing was because it took the guise of a human shape, but it inflicted pain that of a sort that I have never felt before or after. So I don't know.
So again, when I was doing research for Hunting Demons, I discovered, and this was a real treat for me to learn something new, I discovered that there is a great deal of difference between the Western and the Eastern concept of demon. One of the things I found about the Djinn is that the Djinn is mostly a Middle Eastern thing, of course, and they're in Egypt, especially, Egyptian women have kind of a secret weapon. Women in Middle Eastern cultures and Near Eastern cultures are, second-class citizens, and they don't have the best of lives most of the time. But there is a very specialized jinn called the Tsar, and it only possesses women. And this is very prevalent in Egypt. And what the Tsar does is it possesses the woman, and the woman goes to her husband and says, I am being possessed by a Tsar. The only way to cure this is to have a party. And that is a thing in Egyptian society. And if a woman is possessed by a Tsar, the only way to cure her, the only way to exorcise her is for her husband to bring her gifts of jewelry, of flowers, of good things to eat, and they have a party, and they have dancing till the wee hours of the morning to exorcise this demon from this woman, and that it's a great excuse to have a party.
Great excuse to have a party.
Yeah, I was utterly charmed by this revelation.
That is fascinating.
Every once in a while, the Paranormal Rundown comes up with a topic that is really kind of stretching that word paranormal. But it also falls into the more interesting aspects of human behavior and the more interesting and amazing aspects of human dedication. And I got to tell you, you got to be pretty dedicated to say several years before your probable time to die, well, okay, now I'm just going to eat, what do they eat, Dave? Grass?
I think it was tree bark.
Tree bark, and I'm not going to drink anything except water that's got this tannin substance in it. The reason I'm doing this is not for the deliciousness, but to start to mummify my body before I die. So when I die, I am essentially going to be a sterile, almost non-organic shell. So it'll be very easy to deal with my carcass. And Dave, you saw one of
I did. These. I talk about it in the clip. I didn't know what it was when I saw it.
Yeah.
We had gone on our 25th anniversary trip. So we actually went on a trip. We never go anywhere. And we were in Thailand, and we went through this temple, and outside was this guy sitting there in a glass enclosure, cross-legged.
Like a greeter.
Yeah, and he was on the very front of the... They actually built like the roof around him. Mm-hmm. If you think of a sort of like an overhanging roof when you're coming out of a temple,
mm-hmm.
they had above him built it so that there was a sort of an apex above him directly, and it had different like reflective circles or something on the inside of it. But they had obviously built part of the structure around him. And he sit there in his robe with sunglasses on, wrap around like I'll be back, sunglasses.
I wonder what the purpose of the sunglasses is.
Probably because his eyes probably look pretty freaky. That's my guess.
Okay, fair enough. But, yeah, I can buy that. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So it certainly would have a very different effect if you could see his eyes, whether they were open, closed, whatever. With the sunglasses, he's just got that Joe Cool look. And it was fascinating. So, yeah, we got this talking about that, the self-mummified monks. And this is, I think, our first Avalon commentary that we have
in the best of series
we reviewed so far.
Right. Avalon is a good character. She makes things better and keeps us in line.
She tries to.
Well, it is a difficult thing to do.
Yes, it is.
Talked about Zen Buddhist monks.
The Zen Buddhist monks, the guys who mummify themselves prior to death. JJ, how long does it take them to do that?
It took them, I believe, it was either a 1 year or a 5 year process. I don't quite remember, but it was lengthy, and they had an extremely rigid diet during that time. Yeah, it was a massive undertaking, but it was, at least to them, it was an honor to also be able to be at such a high spiritual mark of nirvana to be able to get to that point.
Well, I would think that if you were consuming things that were actually starting to mummify your body, I don't think you'd feel very good.
Well,
that's
what I was. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. How in the world does one begin to mummify their body before they're dead? That can't be good.
Certain things that would then begin to act as natural preservatives.
Well, I guess it gives someone a good excuse to become an alcoholic.
Wow.
There you go. And then
So I found this thing that said that in order to begin the self-mummification process, they adopt a diet, and I'm not going to try to pronounce its name, but it's tree eating, where they forage through forests and subsist on only tree roots, nuts, and berries, tree bark, and pine needle. So it begins the biological preparation for mummification and eliminates any fat and muscle from the frame. Prevents future decomposition by depriving naturally occurring bacteria. Now, this website is showing the picture of a mummy that I saw in Thailand. I actually saw this guy, and I don't remember it saying anything about him prepping for this, but it was this temple in Thailand that we went to, and I believe This was on Koh Samui, and at the very front of the temple, they have this glass case with this Buddhist monk mummy that's wrapped in his, his robes, and he's wearing a pair of sunglasses. Wrap around sort of Ray-Ban-like sunglasses. And so apparently he mummified himself.
Are you still seeing his actual skin, or is he covered with something?
No, he's not covered with something. He's
How long has he been dead?
Now you're asking me. I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't think this is like 1,000 years old or anything, but it wasn't last week.
A lot of these are around 100 to 200 years old, and although
that sounds about right.
You can see a skull pretty much prevalent underneath the facial features. The bodies are still amazingly well preserved for what they are.
Well, the part of this whole thing that fascinates me is having that kind of discipline of saying to yourself, okay, for the next 5 years, I'm going to eat trees or parts of trees, and I'm going to sit here in this one position, and sooner or later I won't even be able to move, but I'll be alive for a good portion of that. Look, I don't have anything close to that kind of commitment. I realize I don't. So what do you do to make your mind that strong?
I would assume that by the time you make that commitment, you have years behind you of mental discipline, right? From meditation to strict diet, not diet of trees, but just strict diet and meditation and specific spiritual practices that you've built up that discipline. It's discipline I don't have, but
yeah, because there are two different states. There is parinirvana and then nirvana. Parinirvana is the state that you reach while you are alive, and it's the first step. So it's temporary, but yet it's the closest that you can essentially get. For example, the listener to the speech on Vulture Mount, when the Buddha held up a white lotus, and the guy just instantly got it and just slipped immediately into parinirvana. That would be the only thing that I could think. At that point, what David was saying, you probably have mastered mind over body at that point, or as close as you can ever possibly get. That's the only thing that to me would allow someone to go through that kind of a horrible sounding process.
The monks who practice self-mummification are called Sokushinbatsu. Sokushinbatsu is also the word used for this extremely painful and lengthy process. The word literally translates to Buddhas in their very body. Traditionally, they were understood to have entered a state of exceedingly deep meditation rather than having actually died, and were still capable of granting the prayers of their worshippers.
Anybody who is dealing with the paranormal, the psychological, the philosophical world will eventually run into the standard human question, and that is, why do bad things happen to good people? Why does a just God allow horribly evil things to happen? Why do children die? Why are wars fought? Why does God allow all that? Or is there simply no God that can control any of it? Well, that whole series of questions is called Theodicy. And
isn't that a Greek book?
It is, and that makes it kind of confusing because they discuss Theodicy in the Odyssey. They discuss it rather deeply, but it is a Greek book. You know, all about Ulysses and all of that. But this is the fundamental human question, or one of the fundamental human questions. And every episode that we've ever done of the Paranormal Rundown, this topic comes up in one way or another. Mm-hmm. So I think one episode we simply decided, all right, let's see if we can tackle this and cover it as well as it can be covered in that time frame.
This episode specifically, it was either our first or second roundup. So what we'll do is we'll hit these topics in a rundown where it's like, you know, that takes us to this topic, but man, that topic, there's a lot of meat to that, and I don't think we want to have a half-hour long discussion right now. So let's set it aside. So I keep this sort of backlog of topics, and we will have an episode called a roundup where instead of pulling new topics, we'll pick 2 or 3 out of that list and then just go deep into them. And that's what this was. This was a roundup.
The roundup approach was Dave's idea entirely.
Yeah, well, it just made sense. You guys were like, oh, well, let's talk about that, but another time. And I was like, oh, I'll start keeping a list. I like lists. So this is one of our more, you know, sort of philosophical episodes. Mm-hmm. This is episode 9. And I think at least 2/3 of this, we're going deep into how the universe works type topics. And I think at its core, it's one of the reasons why we list the rundown under philosophy. It's listed under philosophy, religion, and comedy for the podcast world. And at our hearts, we're all sort of philosophers.
Amateur philosophers, but
yes, well,
reasonably, you know, talented amateurs, reasonably.
Little p philosophers.
Yeah, little p. So, okay, let's get there.
So, if we're going to do a roundup, what should we round up? Should I go back through the choices?
Well, the one that we've already put off from a previous rundown is Theodicy.
That is the one that always keeps coming up.
So,
and I had the perfect story, I think, at least to help frame the conversation.
Let's do that.
Then let's do it.
So back in college, there was a 400 level seminar for religion that you had to take at some point. And I took it pretty early on. I think my sophomore year I took it. And we had to write a huge term paper, and I chose Theodicy. And I started off that paper with an anecdote, a mythical anecdote that has stuck with me to this day. And I've actually quoted it on Southern Demonology once before, but it was a very long time ago. And they go something like this. There are 2 explorers off into the desert. And one day they come upon a garden. An immaculately maintained garden. And they are amazed. Like, they're wandering through the rows and rows of vegetables and flowers and fruits. And one of the explorers looks to the other and says, there has to be a gardener who is maintaining such perfect order in the middle of the desert. And the other one goes, well, I mean, that would make sense, but I sure don't see anybody. So the first gardener goes, okay, we just need to hide. And I bet they're out moving around at night under the cover of darkness. And they go, okay, let's do that. So they do, and they hide out for a week. Nothing. No no sign of any gardener whatsoever. And so the first one goes, okay, that did not work. But I bet they are invisible. And that's why we've detected no presence of them. And so they round up, don't ask from where, a group of dogs. They get night vision goggles. They put up radar everywhere they can with lasers and tripwires. And they patrol this garden for a month. Nothing. And the second guy goes, look, I told you there is no gardener. And the first one goes, okay, how about this? There has to be a gardener. There's proof of it everywhere before us. But I would probably say that the gardener is invisible, undetectable, and unknowable. And the second explorer says, okay, that might be, but what's the difference between that and no gardener at all? Discuss.
The garden.
Yeah, it's a metaphor, of course. The garden is the world.
Garden is the world, and the possible gardener is God and his works in the world.
Correct.
I think it with the whole story in the back line in the garden and the gardener. I think that's just an astounding portrayal of faith. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say faith is because, there's things out there that can't be explained. And some things just have to be just accepted by faith. That's like the ye old question, who created God? Well, we just know he just exists. And that is something that you have to accept ultimately by faith.
Father Birdsong, do you know who you sound like right now?
Who's that?
I mean this in a positive way. And by the way, I am not an atheist. I'm not advocating for atheism. I'm not trying to say that whatsoever. Right. But no, you sound like, have you ever heard of Immanuel Kant?
Yes.
No.
All right. Kant was a philosopher who was he occupied both extremes. So he came at the very tail end of the Enlightenment period into the Romance period. However, he was the most kind of staunch advocate for logic and dryness that there ever was. But Kant was famous for coming up with the categorical imperative. But at the end of the day, what he was thinking was that what we know of is based upon categories. So a man walking along a beach is a man, the idea of walking, what a beach is, etc. And he said there is a category for all things except for God.
Okay.
Well,
that kind of makes sense.
Also, look, I can't out philosophize JJ, but I mean,
neither can I.
There's the Kantian leap of faith,
right?
Where at some point one has to simply say, "I will accept this."
Right. In fact, Kant said, and I kind of left off the most important part, sorry about that, is there's no category for God, which leaves all the more room for faith.
Correct.
Exactly.
All right, so help me out here, because you guys have talked about Theodicy multiple times as something we need to discuss. And honestly, I haven't really thought about the term or heard the term in a long time. Maybe it was mentioned in philosophy, I don't remember. But so I looked up the definition. Mm-hmm. And the definition of theodicy on Webster says it's the defense of God's goodness and omnipotence in view of the existence of evil.
In a world that's full of evil and pain and injustice and horror.
So what I've heard is, so far, is, hey, here's goodness. Does that have to be God? Is there a God that exists that made that? I've heard from you guys so far, like how do we justify that there is a God? Sort of, right? But where does the evil come into this? Evil as the kicker, right? It's the having evil. Does that justify the case for God, or does it make it more difficult to justify the case for God? Is that what Theodicy is really all about?
Well, it is the justification for God, and it can be taken in two different paths. The first is if there really is a God, but what it's taken for more times in theology and philosophy is the justification of God, of can you actually show that there is a being of pure goodness in the face of evil? And for example, most introductory philosophy students, their professors will assign to them in Philosophy 101 to read the one chapter from Bratia Karamazov, the Brothers Karamazov, on the executioner, because that sums up so perfectly the idea of evil.
In many English translations of The Brothers Karamazov, the chapter that JJ just mentioned is called The Grand Inquisitor. It's often thought of as the most important chapter in all of fictional literature. If you would like to read it for yourself, there is an excellent, free translation of the book on the Project Gutenberg website. It will be found in Book 5, Chapter 5. Much of the chapter is a long, deeply philosophical poem. And now, we return to the gang of nerds, who are still talking about God, good and evil, free will, faith, and all other topics in the nerd realm.
And I think it also comes down to back to the faith part, but also to a person's choice. And whenever I hear of just basically about the story that you just told, it reminds me of when you're talking about the garden and the gardener, it reminds me of the Song of Solomon, to where it says, I've come into my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have prepared the sacrifice. I have prepared the banquet table, so on and so forth. But what it really boils down to is someone, just like Vic said earlier, taking that leap of faith or making the choice to go down one of these paths. Ultimately, everybody's going to have to choose a path. And I think that's, in my view, I think that's what it's all about, is making a choice, one way or the other. You can't have it both ways. Everybody's going to have to take a path at some point.
Well, the most common...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the most common thing that I see in the Quoraverse, the Redditverse, the various universes on the internet of, people who are trying to actually think through things.
Exactly.
They take all kinds of paths, but one of the primary paths is simply saying, I just cannot bring myself to believe that a God exists that would allow something like the Holocaust, or like the attack of Israel, or like the abortion of millions of babies, or how could there possibly be a God that allows that sort of thing to happen on Earth?
Well, the first thing we have to understand is God did not allow that.
Correct.
Man caused that.
Mm-hmm.
That is a part of original sin. See, people always want to blame God for everything, but man's the one that committed the original sin. So there's always going to be that in the world.
Free will is a double-edged sword.
Exactly.
You can either say, I want God to protect me against all the bad things that can happen in the world. But then that sacrifices one's own will. And at the end of the day, you would become nothing more than a puppet that sings praises.
Exactly.
Or hides in the shadows.
Right. I've heard this argument multiple times, in a spiritual sense, and then from just a sense of, especially younger people, just looking at, why would God let these things happen? And I come to over and over again the idea that a perfect life is boring. A perfect life is not something you learn from. If you don't have challenges in life, then you don't learn anything from it. You don't grow. You don't mature. Just like if you have a child and they don't fall and scrape their knee, they don't fail the math test, they don't have whatever experiences, get turned down by their first crush. If they don't go through these experiences, they don't grow. And I have come much more in life to view the relationship of God to us as really everything involved in that fatherly relationship, meaning we're the children that are growing up. And I don't mean growing up until we're adults. I mean, we're growing up until the day we die.
Exactly.
And so, that's what makes the most sense to me. And yes, there are horrific things that are allowed to happen. And everybody, it's not necessarily the person who it happens to who is the one that's learning from it. Very often it's the family member that has to deal with the loss. It's the parent that has to deal with the loss. I've seen that. I've known people who've lost children, and it's horrible, right? But they are learning something from that. And it is a crucible. They're being, they're forged, their soul is changing from those experiences. And without that, what are they? Just happy? Is life all about being happy? I don't think so.
There are two things that I always come to mind when I'm thinking about this. One is, there's a particularly, and I don't mean this to be unpleasant, there's a particularly nasty kind of atheist out there who is a real, in your face, my God, how can someone who seems to be as intelligent as you possibly believe in a God, you are a disgrace because of the fact that you believe in a God. And I run into these people quite often, and they'll give me the argument of why would God allow X to happen? And the question that I've asked them over and over and over again and have yet to receive an answer is, okay, let's say that God had decided that I am no longer going to allow X to happen to men on earth. Where do you draw the line? Where, what, yes, I can understand Holocaust, but what about cashiers who deliberately give you the wrong change? What about rapists? What about child abuse? What about people who don't obey traffic laws?
Parking tickets.
Parking tickets. Where do you draw that line? Where do you say, okay, up to here is fine human behavior. After this, I, as God, am going to prevent it. And then I'll ask things like, okay, just imagine, that you find yourself one day, your 2-year-old is walking toward an electrical outlet with a fork. It doesn't really that 2-year-old doesn't really have language. And the best way you can figure out to communicate to him that you cannot do that is to pop his bottom, which I have done.
Yes. Yes.
Which I have done. Well, you reach back to pop the bottom, and suddenly you can't move your arm forward because God has chosen that that's the line.
I'm not allowing any corporal punishment of children. So then you're no longer a human. You're no longer a self-directed human. You're a puppet.
The reality is, if he did draw a line and say, okay, the line is anything less than a horrible car accident, I'll allow, but from horrible car accident up to nuclear war, I won't. Those things are off limits.
Those things are off limits.
Okay. Well, then we would all be complaining about falling and scraping our knees. Why does God allow me to scrape my knee? Because our whole scale would be thrown off, right?
Well, and think about it. If there's ever a system put into place, we have gotten extremely good at, or certain people have gotten extremely good at finding the loopholes and trying to circumvent it. And that's probably where the vast majority of human ingenuity would fall into, is to try to get around whatever prohibitions have been set for us.
Well, one of the points is God did draw a line. He drew the line in the beginning. He told Adam and Eve in the garden,
correct,
you can eat of everything here except from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay? But they were deceived and they ate. Okay? Well, so here's the thing that nobody in our society today wants to deal with. There's consequences to everyone's actions, right?
That's correct.
So God said, okay, so from now on, this is going to happen. Adam, you're gonna work from the sweat of your brow. You're gonna deal with thistles and thorns and blah 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 blah. And pain in childbirth, Eve, and so on and so forth. But here's the good news, and he gives us some good news there as well. But however, to say why would God allow these things? God didn't allow them to happen. Man made them come to pass to happen. So.
Well, I mean, to be fair, he did allow them to happen because he has the ability to stop any of it.
Right, but he allowed the humans to exercise free will.
Yes.
Yeah, he allowed it to happen because of consequences to their actions.
And there are cases, I strongly believe, where God does intervene. God does decide, absolutely. I'm not going to let this happen. This is where we talked about the idea of, and I know that's for another discussion, but the idea of the purpose of possession.
Oh, yeah.
God allows it to happen. And when it's time, he ensures that it stops happening. And so, God does have his thumb on the pulse of things going, well, okay, that's enough. Right? But yeah, I mean, without free will and the ability to cause terrible things to happen, then we're all still just 5-year-olds in a playpen where we can't hurt ourselves. And that's
absolutely.
I don't think that's the way God intended us to live.
I agree. Absolutely.
But the idea of evil, now, bad things happening to me are not necessarily evil. So
correct.
when this says evil, I view like the bad stuff, right? And I find that, not to harp on it, but my experience did the opposite for me. The evil that I experienced threw me towards God. It was literally, if this evil exists, if it is real, then why not God? There has to be a counterbalance to this evil. And so, it pushed me towards God. And I think God allowed that to happen for that purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that when you speak of evil, most people just lump it into one category. But to me, there has always been two types of evil. There is mortal evil, which typically stem out of selfishness, ignorance, or something along the lines. But rarely is it the most, never is it rooted in like a spirit of true destructiveness. It will cause pure destructiveness, but that's not kind of the root all end all. And then there is infernal evil. And infernal evil is there. It is only rooted in destruction. It is there to corrupt, to filthify, to putrefy, whatever other ifis you want to throw in there. And to me, those are vastly different in nature.
Yeah, that infernal evil is all about destruction.
Absolutely.
Destruction, and like you say, corruption. But yeah, I agree.
And we cannot negate the fact, guys, that some people are just damn mean.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. All right, so next is from we're getting into the last of our episodes for this part of the countdown, and it is episode 10. This clip is another pretty long one. It's about how exorcisms have gotten harder over time, and we hit it from a couple different angles, but I think the general consensus, and this is what we hear on from other exorcists that have podcasts, YouTube channels, and in books, is that in general, it isn't as easy as it used to be. Of course, none of it's as easy as it was, back in the times of Christ when they just said, "Hey, get out."
Right.
Sadly, that's no longer the case. But here we go. Exorcisms are hard.
Well, can I comment on that just for a second?
Sure.
Well, the reason I find this sort of thing pretty interesting is because I have this idea of the spiritual / moral gestalt of humanity. And I know that's a weird Vic Hermanson term. But I'll go back to Walmart. I saw a pretty fascinating study one time where a college graduate student put a camera in Walmart and took a picture of everybody who came in, every single person from the same angle. And out of thousands of photos, made this composite face. What's the standard face of an American going to Walmart? And it was absolutely unremarkable. But that concept also applies to what's in the heart, soul, and mind of those people coming to Walmart. And there is an average level of spirituality, of devotion to morality, of hatred of morality in all those people. Personally, I think that's changed. And I think that's one of the reasons that these exorcisms are harder to do.
Yeah, well, I was a little worried that you were calling Walmart customers unremarkable because, boy, I have really seen some remarkable Walmart customers. By the way, Walmart, if you're listening, we would love for you to sponsor our podcast. Just throwing that out there.
Well, yes, I'm not even sure how we would go about sponsoring Walmart, but hey, we'd give it a go.
We would give it a go.
But all right, so please excuse my Vic Hermanson philosophical hoodoo talk.
That's what we do.
That's what I do.
All right, let's talk about it. Are exorcisms becoming more difficult? And if so, why?
So I think maybe, and Vic, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is referring to over time, exorcisms have gotten harder to do, right? The first time. right? And I know that there's I think Father Malachi Martin had something on this, right? Didn't he? Where he was at a certain point, there's a theory that there was some sort of ritual done at the Vatican, and after that point, exorcisms have become harder to do. Now, you can't pin them down and they'll say, yes, that was done, right? But what you can get a lot of modern exorcists in the Catholic Church is to say, yeah, they're harder than they were 20 years ago or 40 years ago. Have you found that yourself?
Yes, sir, because and I'm speaking strictly of my opinion now,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have to look far to understand and see that there's been a greater influx of demonic influence, especially in our country. I mean, all you have to do is look around, and and I think Malachi Martin even hit on that too. As from case to case, some would be harder, but from this point of 2024 and 20 years ago, oh yeah, it's the demonic is more in your face and more bold and more rash. I'll put it to you this way: the American people have given the enemy more power.
Oh, I think so.
Agreed.
So I mean, so when you have pastors and quote unquote church people that has fulfilled the great prophet C.S. Lewis by not believing in the devil, he's just gained a lot more power, right? And so with us giving him that power in a greater influx of the demonic forces, well, of course they're going to be harder.
So when you hear about exorcisms, when you read about exorcism in the Bible, right? It's hey, leave, and they're gone, right? I mean, it's an immediate thing. And then over time, it seems like, well, the rite was put together, the rite was followed, and maybe it took one or two times to go through the rite and before an exorcism would be complete. And now you've got, I know some exorcists say it's pretty common to have a year or 2 years of repeated sessions of performing the rite before an exorcism is complete. So what has your experience been like with that when you started this 30 years ago versus today? Was it like 30 years ago it might be, hey, a month, and now it's 3? What's that like?
Well, I have to be honest and say they have gotten harder. I mean, one of the cases that we talked about not too long ago, I told you that it was one of the hardest that I've ever had. But also with the enemy gaining more power these days because we've given him power, really. But before I forget to say this, let me remind you that every case is different. It really depends on the power of the demon, or if there's legion or just one. So, and very rarely these days is there ever just one. And that's another problem too. But I forgot where I was going all of a sudden.
Well, JJ, I was going to ask JJ, I know he's talked to folks that from a Christianity standpoint, from a Buddhist standpoint, from different religions. Is that I wonder if that's a thing that you've seen in your interviews, JJ, with that, where they think it's gotten harder?
It's a good question. I haven't specifically asked that question to people involved. However, I most certainly haven't met anyone who has claimed that it has ever been an easy task. Absolutely. And I would say that at least nowadays, I think Father Mike has always been famous for saying you can't cast out mental illness. And one of the things that the church has always been, at least nowadays, really good at is making people undergo both physical and mental evaluations to ensure that there's not a more mundane reason why someone may be afflicted and what that affliction might be. So, exorcism has become, for example, one of the documentaries that we happened to watch on our Discord server was a set of exorcisms that was done in Italy. And if you look at that, you would think nothing of it. Like, it wasn't difficult. It was more around managing parishioners and assisting them with their lives. And when there was a quote-unquote demonic influence, there was nothing to distinguish it. And there was not a whole lot of effort in trying to make sure it wasn't anything but that. If you have that kind of a situation, it was easy to cast that out because it more than likely wasn't demonic in nature. But now that we are limiting the pool and possibly getting to the root of the issue, that is definitely going to make, you're getting rid of the easy path, and you're limiting it to only the infernal. And in that case, I think it's making the true difficulty of that shine through. I know that was a long, circuitous path to get to my point, so forgive me.
No, but it makes sense.
Well,
I thought you did it pretty well.
I even want to back that up because, 30 years ago, yes, it was easier, but 30 years ago, I was even never physically attacked either. And within the past 2 years, I have been physically attacked, and recently had curses put on me. So it is ramping up, and that's why I liked JJ's podcast the other night, because he states about what the exorcist himself goes through, and so it is very hard. It is a very taxing process, and you lose a part of yourself each time. And with the way that it's getting harder and harder and harder, we're probably going to regress back to very much fewer people that operate in the office of exorcist once again.
Simply because they are not going to want to tackle such difficult, dangerous things?
Exactly.
Well, I'd say you also have a shrinking pool of priests who have supernatural faith.
Priests who would be willing to do that.
Right.
I want to ask a logistical question. And I, once again, take it back to the clinical world. Cancer. When a person gets cancer and they are cured of that cancer, although that word really is hardly ever used in the care of cancer, when that cancer is placed into remission, it's no longer considered to be an active process. It's almost as if the cancer wants to return. And I know that seems like a really odd thing to say, attributing will to a disease. But I've always thought that there must be something like that when you're dealing with possession. That if a demon is forced from a person's mind, body, being, is there the will on the part of that demon to return to that particular person?
the demon always wants a host.
Mm-hmm.
And if he could find his former host in a weaker state than they were before, he's going to want to go right back, and he wants vengeance too. I mean, that's just to quote Iron Maiden from back in the 80s. That's just the nature of the beast, man. They don't like you. They want to destroy you. If they could kill you, they'd do it, and that's what they want. So, especially you mentioned cancer patients. If a cancer patient happens to be possessed and then gains cancer and gives up on everything and becomes very spiritually weak, they're open target again. Unfortunately, it's kind of like. JJ made another good point on his podcast. He said once the parasite has entered, it's very hard to get it out. And if that wound is not cleaned up, then you're going to have more parasites coming, even more than you did the first time.
And I suppose that to a certain degree, it's not something you ever fully heal from. Right? There is always going to be a part of you that is permanently changed from having been possessed.
Oh yeah, that's the nature of man. That's who we are. It'll always be there. That emotional scarring will always.
Right.
I mean, you may go on and have a good and natural life, but that emotional scar, that stigma of what happened to you. You will never forget that, unless by some divine miracle of God, and He erases that from your mind.
Right.
It'll always be there.
Well, we're on a cheerful start tonight.
But Josh wrote something down back to the original question, and I want him to share it right quick.
Hey, Josh.
All right, so why exorcisms are weaker now is because the exorcist power comes from Christ to the church. But if the church is weak, then so is the exorcist.
And Francis just made the church very weak.
If the people in the world are letting them in, and if the afflicted are accepting them in, then it's just going to make it even weaker.
Well, we're talking eliminating home court advantage.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, you essentially talk about wanting to make sure you have home court advantage.
Oh, yeah.
By bringing people into the church.
Absolutely. Oh, and by the way, that situation flip-flopped, which I thought it would.
The situation with
Paula,
yes.
Yep. It's back to me wanting to come, her wanting me to come to her home. I said, well, It's not going to happen. Sorry.
So that's an interesting idea that the exorcist is, and I wouldn't have thought about it that way. The exorcist is dependent to a certain degree on the strength of the church.
Absolutely.
Instead of the direct relationship with Christ. Because
I think both of those
think
are
of it
factors.
in terms of the church. I think of it in terms of, I mean, I know from a Catholic perspective, you've got authority, permission given by the bishop, and so on. But I've always thought of it, I guess, in terms of the exorcist's relationship with God, and the strength is from God. I never thought about the church sort of in the middle of that.
I am not in any way psychic. I am not someone who has, I don't even think, any particular degree of discernment. But I do sort of seem to feel things, you know, and I guess I'll relate the feeling to either a feeling of warmth and strength or coldness and weakness. And usually when I go into the building of St. Joseph, which is the church that I go to, there's a very strong feeling of warmth and strength. And I have definitely noticed in the last 3 months that feeling is far, far less powerful. Much more a feeling of coldness and aloneness. Now, then I have to stop and say to myself, okay, Victor, are you sensing something wrong in the church, or are you sensing something wrong in you? You know, that's the question that a rational man has to ask themselves. And it could be a combination of both. But it's, if the rest of the Catholic Church feels that kind of distance, I can't imagine that any kind of spiritual warfare would not be more difficult.
Well, it's interesting because if you follow the train of thought that was laid out, which is the exorcist gets a lot of their strength to perform that exorcism through the church, then what about the consecration of the church ground? What about the holy that are in the church? Does their strength wane as the church wanes in strength as well? And therefore you would potentially feel it in a physical church, like it doesn't have the strength that it does before, because, and I hate to use the word power, but the strength behind it is less because the church is less.
Well, power is the correct word. I mean, one of the main reasons why, another main reason why we depend on the church, and the reason why we depend on that order, because it is the church's duty. It is our duty, your duty, as part of the kingdom, as part of the bride, as a part of our local parishes. It is our duty to first and foremost pray, build up, and strengthen one another.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't have that backing, if I go out as a Bob Larson and want to do everything on my own and act stupid, things are not going to turn out too well. But yes, I mean, if we don't have that support that St. Paul teaches about the body being knitted together and each limb, each part having their own thing. Mm-hmm. If I'm a pinky finger and David's the forefinger, if my forefinger gets cut off, it's going to weaken my pinky finger tremendously.
Now, why do I have to be the one that gets cut off?
You're just an easy target tonight.
You're an easy target, man.
I done been cut off enough this week.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough. He has paid at the office.
Just about everybody who has grown up in the United States has at some time been aware of, been at a party where people were doing this particular thing, had friends who up in a closet had a Ouija board. And it's almost impossible to be between 12 and 16 and not grab that Ouija board and start asking questions like, does Monica like me? Or am I going to marry Paul? Or, all these teen angst questions. Well, usually nothing happens at all. But occasionally, things do happen. I've had some experiences with Ouija boards, not with my using them, but in seeing other people use them. And there's always now the idea of, the Ouija board has its own demon, the one who's really, really doing all this stuff, and that's ZoZo.
Yeah, we it was interesting, the connections that were made here, and the connection to The Exorcist, obviously, and then Pazuzu. So there were some strong feelings in it in terms of what it is and isn't, as far as ZoZo. So if you are a big fan of ZoZo, you might just skip this last clip.
Right. Yeah, especially one of our members doesn't have a lot of positive things to say about the whole idea of ZoZo.
Yes.
I have seen TikTokers to this day in the horror space who claim that, oh, if I mention the name ZoZo to this day, then my house just gets all kinds of paranormal activity, blah, blah, blah. And I have never called such bullshit, and I don't mean to use that term lightly, in my entire life. ZoZo is another example of creepypasta. That's how it started its life. It is a story of the demon of the Ouija board, and it is the one that whenever you talk to any spirit, that's who you're really speaking with, is ZoZo. If you give any credence to the story of Annabelle, of the Warrens, you instantly cannot believe that ZoZo is real, or at least is not the only thing that exists out there. But more than that, to think that there is only one entity and that this is the major overriding thing, that it's the archdemon of all portals that leads a humanity through a wooden board with a planchette, is sheer idiocy. And I will be happy to debate anyone on this particular topic. The idea of ZoZo infuriates me beyond all belief. I will say that Ouija boards are extremely dangerous. I will never mess with one. I did as a kid. Thank goodness nothing bad happened. I don't want to mess with it. I don't even do kakuri-san, which is the Japanese version of a Ouija board that's played with a piece of paper, the hiragana alphabet, and a 5-yen coin, which has a hole in the middle of it, so it looks like a planchette. I don't even mess with that. So, but the danger in Ouija boards is that if you go around opening doors and you don't know how to close them, I'm not saying that every time you use a Ouija board and something happens that it's a demon. That's ridiculous. Same thing about ZoZo. But the possibility of encountering the preternatural is never zero. And you put yourself in great harm by playing a game.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Well, okay. Let me, as much as I agree with you, I'm going to go there and try to be devil's advocate. How about that? A lot of people proclaim that ZoZo is one of the same with Pazuzu.
And that is absolutely incorrect.
And they also proclaim that ZoZo or Pazuzu was the one that possessed the real life Roland Doe from the movie The Little Boy that the movie The Exorcist was founded upon.
No, actually, that's not true. So this is where it gets a little interesting. Pazuzu has gotten a horribly bad rap ever since The Exorcist. And that's because they were looking for physical media that might represent the idea of an ancient evil. And someone discovered a statue of Pazuzu. and that's what they went with. Pazuzu is a demon, but demons in Mesopotamia are a vastly different breed of things. Pazuzu specifically is a protector demon. He was actually the one that guarded against his Irving Finkel thinks that it was his estranged or divorced wife, Lamashtu, who would go around breathing in the night air and hunting for infants in order to devour. And people would hang up a statue of Pazuzu over their door mantles or in windowsills, and that would keep Lamashtu at bay. You can actually find very similar traditions in Ethiopia now, where people, women who are pregnant, will get Debtera to write these magical scrolls that they wear around their neck, and that protects them against Debtera. No, not Debtera, from Shotalai, which are this race of baby-killing demons, which might as well be lifted from Mesopotamia for how closely they're interrelated. But semantically, ZoZo has two Z's. That doesn't mean it's related to Pazuzu. In fact, there's no way from the name Pazuzu you could ever derive ZoZo. It just doesn't happen. It's like saying JoJo and JJ, oh, they must be absolutely related, and I am definitely not a JoJo. So it's the exact same kind of linguistic principle to the matter. But yeah, people will make all kinds of claims, but it's not true.
Just going back to ZoZo, what are the characteristics that are generally assigned to ZoZo?
Generally, now, JJ, I am going to need your help on this, but if I'm not mistaken, ZoZo, one of his main tactics is manipulation and confusion. Would you agree with that, JJ?
JJ is shaking his head.
Okay. And see that's why ZoZo is so popular right now, and that's why a lot of people use him, is because he brings on that confusion and that manipulation, and so he's therefore an easy target, whether he's made up or not, to make good movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I look at the name ZoZo and I look at the Ouija board and I go, well, okay, to get ZoZo, you got to go back and forth as far as you can on the board, except that if you went all the way to the left, it would actually be an N, and zin doesn't sound as good. So we'll go to the letter next to N and go O. Okay, ZoZo, that works, because we can easily swing back and forth and hit ZoZo.
I got to be honest with you. Every time that I've ever heard the name ZoZo, I automatically thought of Bozo.
That's more plausible, honestly.
Well, we have reached the end of our review of the last 5 episodes of Season 1. Or, I'm sorry, the second 5 episodes of Season 1, since there are 20 episodes. So, next week we will do 5 more, and of course the week after that we'll do 5. We'll do the final 5. I have enjoyed doing these, and that it sort of reminds me of how much stuff we've covered.
It has been incredible going through these. We really have hit a lot of topics.
Right. How many really meaty topics we've hit. I'm sure we've done really well on some, and man, we may have just really screwed the pooch on a few. But you just can't cover that much material and cover every inch of it perfectly.
Just look, when we started talking about doing this, I thought, yeah, we could pull an episode out of our, just sort of our top clips.
Mm-hmm.
That won't be hard to do. And when I wound up with, 9+ hours of content, and that was skipping stuff, right? I mean, I have dropped some really good conversations. So, be sure if you haven't listened to the to the rundown, if you're a new listener, go back and listen to some of these episodes and to the full episode. There's a ton of great conversation, great ideas, really thoughtful ways of approaching some of these topics. There's a lot of good out there.
When I listen to podcasts, I have sort of 3 different states of mind that I'm in. There's definitely the mow the lawn, wash the dishes, wash the car kind of state of mind. And the truth is, some of these podcasts can just almost be background noise. You know, I don't really care about what they're talking about. Sometimes I'm trying to learn something specifically. And sometimes I'm looking to expand my understanding of this whole paranormal world, because I still find it fascinating. And I think the Paranormal Rundown is a good show for people to listen to in that particular state of mind. So, would recommend that you do so. I also will implore, that's a good word, implore you to send us feedback about these best of episodes. Have they urged you to go out there and listen to these things? Have the clips that we've chosen been effective? What else would you like to get feedback on, Dave?
I just would like to know if people are enjoying it. You know, it really is it's actually a great way to become familiar with the rundown, and you know the way we approach things, some of the personalities in it, and so on. But I just like to know, are you enjoying it? I mean, we're going to do the next 2 episodes no matter what, but some of that feedback may, you know, affect. Maybe we'll do this again next year. Maybe next December we'll have the countdown to 2026. You know, and we'll reevaluate. You know, we'll pull clips out of season 2.
Let me pull up the list real quick. I didn't have it open. So what I'm going to talk about while this list is opening is that's a huge list, and there's not really very much overlap.
Look, Vic, you had on like the first episode, you went through every single topic on the list at the trailer of the episode.
Did we?
We do not have time for you to list out 2,700 plus topics.
2,714.
Over 2,710 topics.
2,710 exciting and mysterious topics.
So you can't take the time. I don't have enough time on
we don't have enough time to do that
for you to list them all, even if you spoke really fast.
But what I would like to do is ask you if there are topics that you want to hear somebody talk about. Anything related to the paranormal world, anything related to alternative history, anything related to strange human behavior. Oh, man.
Conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories, which we don't really go into a lot.
Not a lot, but I think we've covered some.
Yeah, we will occasionally go down that path, but it's not where we focus most of our attention on conspiracy theories. Partially because I don't like to. Because
I think I guess I'm thinking in terms of, you know, there's aliens living under the mountains of Peru, or not like political conspiracy theories.
They're not living under the mountains of Peru. They're living under Mount Adams. Come on, man.
My mountains wrong.
Get your mountains right. Okay, so until next week, this is Vic Hermanson and
David Griffith.
A little slow there, Dave.
I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say something after the end. I was waiting for your trailer.
I'm just hoping you weren't sitting there thinking. I was hoping you weren't just sitting there thinking, who?
No. I actually tonight do know who I am.
Okay.
I know my name.
The Paranormal Rundown is a production of Gang of Nerds Media, which is composed of myself, Vic Hermanson, Dave Griffith, Father Michael Birdsong, and JJ Johnson. Hoping that JJ and Father Mike will be back soon. Anytime we use any kind of music, it comes from Lobo Loco or from Smart Sound, or it's just in the public domain. If we ever use media clips, we do so under the protection of the Fair Use Doctrine. And you can always contact us at feedback@paranormalrundown.com.